You noble diggers, all stand up now.
Welcome, comrade. Never forget the forms.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to my channel. Today we will be talking about Winston Churchill. I just didn't want to talk about David Hume today. I'll do it tomorrow. I really don't like this guy. I think he's overrated by a lot in history. I think it's instructive to think about him, though, that whatever mediocrity he was, and he was a mediocrity, that his failures are illuminative, are revelatory about the failures of the greater system. When you're taught first about World War II, there is a tendency to be reductionist about what Hitler was, right? That he was this evil genius and that he was so great at speaking, and that's why the Germans went there, right? And it undercuts the system, the 80 million Germans involved, that Krupp Industries had CEOs and owners and proprietors that were so reactionary, so anti-communist, that they would have put any monster forward to maintain their business interests. And so when you learn about the intelligentsia and the nobility and the liberals who refused to work with the communists in pre-Hitler Germany, you learn to see it much less as Hitler's fault and more as the result of a system and the result of choices of rich people. The same is true when you think about Churchill, and I don't like Churchill, right? I want to maintain that he's not just the result of his system. He was an idiot, a moron, ill-suited, almost cost us the game. Yeah, just over and over again, the examples of his arrogance, his idiocy got us into trouble. And anything that he left, that is his legacy, was oracular, was not oracular, was a result of his oratory, was, like Commando. That's his, Commando is his contribution from his time fighting the Boers. Yeah, but he sends the Prince of Wales, a battleship, 30,000 tons of steel, on a show the flag mission in a time of airplanes and bombs and sitting ducks completely destroyed out there. And all his writings about the war are also stupid. He talks constantly about the need in India to only draft from the martial races. And the martial races are a leftover, a ploy from the time of the Raj, when the British were ruling as the East India Company. They wanted to rule with the lightest touch possible to not provoke any kind of Hindu or linguistic uprising against their rule, because there wasn't many British people there. And so what they did is they recruited from minorities within the population of India. Hill people is what they really liked. They liked peoples that were small, meaning not many, and lived in hills, because they thought that this isolation from town to town made good fighters, that you needed to be a fighter to be a member of these peoples. And so you can read him being like, oh, you can't recruit too many, they'll rise up as communists. It's like, are we fighting the Nazis here or not, right? And the starving of Bangladesh, there's something like 3 million starved to death because he was such a coward, because he was worried about communism on the home front, right? Because he was worried that if he couldn't maintain his little Treatlerites at home, that there might be communism there. So he starved 3 million people to death. How does that help the honor of the crown? And moreover, with those two facts, the not drafting and starving Indians, India got its independence in 47. And it would have either way, even if the British hadn't done it so honorably and allowed it and signed off on it. They would have just announced it, killed any Brit there, and made it so. So he's an idiot, but it's the systems that produce these idiots, right? Why is there a 70-year-old man leading during a moment of crisis like that? Why was there back-to-back 70-year-old men? Um, what's his face? Neville Chamberlain died of cancer like several weeks after he lost the prime ministership. He was old. He's an old man. How can they know? How can they know about technology? And how can they be on the front lines of civil advancement, civilizational advancement? It's dereliction of duty for the system to have such a leader at such a time. But the system produces these stupid leaders because it's idealistic. And that's, of course, where I was going with this, that the philosophy of these people is what makes them so stupid. I don't know if you've read this about World War One, but the British uh, refused to let the men dig in. That the German trenches were superior, well superior to the British trenches. And this was because the British thought at the highest command, they had a debate, and they said, if we let the lads dig in and pour cement, they won't want to climb out of the hole and attack the enemy. If you were a materialist, you would know that morale has an upper limit, that even if you get it to 110%, that you can only do that by keeping the lads' feet dry and their bellies full and their hands warm. Saying, giving them a better defensive trench doesn't make them less likely to attack. But making them live in a dirt hole does make them less effective on the attack. But no one can even imagine that in the British upper command because they're all idealists. They don't think materially. They don't think of men as material. They think of uh, ideals to be aspired to, and it continually trips them up in their aspirations towards them. Singapore had no landward defenses, and it was basically for the same reasons, that it would be bad for morale to have defenses. I'm sure it was worse for morale to lose the most important strategic point on Earth, which is the Straits of Singapore. I'm not defending the British Empire here, but if we are to judge people um, objectively as world leaders, as warlords, chieftains, kings, and emperors, then he failed. He failed miserably. He had the easiest go of it. He probably could have crushed the Nazis had he had any perspicacity for it. I've wargamed it many, many times. I think that the way to beat the Germans would be to roll up their flanks. So I would win the campaign in East Africa first. The British didn't even garrison Somaliland, the eastern portion of their East African holding. So they had to wage this long front war on Ethiopia from Sudan, you know, training in supplies from Alexandria or sailing them into Kenya. Instead, they could have had a multiple front war had they just garrisoned Somaliland with a couple divisions. And then the Italians couldn't have taken it so easily. And then once East Africa falls to the British, then that frees up supplies and troops and logistics troops, naval assets. And so those East Africa troops flee up north to North Africa They win the North Africa campaign in the first thrust. Uh, there is back and forth to the East Africa campaign. The Italians are thrown back all the way to Benghazi, and then they're reinforced with German Africa Corps, and the German Africa Corps chase them back to Al Alamein, which is beyond the starting position. But if the East African troops were coming up, you know, divisional sized units, tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 extra troops, then the North Africa campaign goes off without a hitch because you outnumber the enemy so significantly. And then with the North Africa campaign ended, the Burma campaign, the Singapore campaign, all of it just becomes easy. But no one can see that because they don't have, they were so cautious as like as a dispositional point, and they couldn't even see that within themselves, that they were so worried about World War One that it so shook them, losing so many dudes, that they didn't think rationally, okay, how do I stop that? How do I not do that again? And the answer is, don't get into a slogging match in Europe, in Western Europe, with land powers. Beat people colonially, use the resources that you extract, better propel the empire. If all of Africa is shipping in troops and rubber, the planes that you can put out are, double the effectiveness and half the cost of a German fighter. And then with air superiority, a fight on the ground is just, play acting. It doesn't matter because the boys overhead are going to come in and bomb the other guys. So do I really need to go kill the other dude on the ground? I just got to keep them up and around and moving so they can see them. The systems that produce failure like this all the time are because of their hierarchies, their strict hierarchies. People are placed in positions by the victors of history. It's wrong. The victors of history, even if they are, demigods and revolutionaries and moral people, it's just a matter of time until their successors are manipulated by, the beasts of men, bureaucrats, and emptiness and soullessness will suffuse whatever victory comes, because man is a sinner. We are all sinners. There is no bottom to the depravity that people will descend to. And so systems that cement hierarchies don't produce good leaders. And that's why Trotsky's notion of permanent revolution is right. That we must be constantly selecting from proletarian vanguard class, chieftains, leaders, geniuses that appear from the proletarian upper crust, and put them in charge of a lot of things. Churchill, a chieftain selected by dynasty. Churchill's ancestor, I don't know how many great-grandfathers, could be an uncle too, I guess, but I think it's a direct ancestor. John Churchill saved England from the French, 200 years before Churchill did. And 150 years before that, Churchill's ancestor, through his wife, was Francis Drake, who saved the British from the Spanish, 400 years before Churchill. That's no system of leadership. That's no system of picking leaders. That's just feudalism. It's just dynasties. And whatever comes out of your genetic material is accidental. It has something to do with who you are and what you've achieved, but not a lot, and is definitely not determinative of a good outcome. When Trotsky started the Russian Revolution, he went out and found all the generals that would be all of the best World War II generals for Stalin. He just found men in the army that he knew were working class, could see was a genius, and put him in charge. Tukhachevsky and
Right, what's a war hero got to do? Get some lubrication around here.
but anyways, systems need to pick leaders, people to be in charge, and those people can no longer be picked by the systems that produce this civilization. The civilization accidentally got here. We, in a fit of absent-mindedness, inherited the stars, much as the British said about their conquest of the world. But now it's time to use rationality, reason, our minds, and beg with reality to let us have this inheritance. Thank you. Have a good day. Hello, you've made it to the end of the video. Thank you. This channel has one mission: to prevent civilizational collapse associated with climate change, to prevent 100 million refugees by 2035, to stop 7 billion from starving to death by 2075. And we will do this through one main vehicle. We mean to unite the Anglosphere. We will do this by convincing the Commonwealth of His Majesty King Charles III to apply for statehood as one. And then with this new power, we will be able to negotiate in good faith with the rest of the world on how to tackle this crisis. Thank you and enjoy.